welcome everybody. You guys are day two. We are day two, virtual summit that everyone needs right now. And this session is on selling appropriately and effectively during these weird coronavirus COVID times. There's obviously a lot of kind of just uncertain things in terms of what is a playbook now? What does that look like when it comes to selling? So I'm really excited to have all of these fantastic folks on this panel. I think they'll all bring a lot of helpful information to the table. Enough talking from me. I am recording this, so if you guys need this to reference back on, just shoot me an email after this. I'll send an email with a survey. So first complete that and then respond and let me know if you'd like this recording. Happy to send it. And if you guys have any questions, please utilize the chat function. It should be at the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A function. The chat's good for just, conversation, but the Q&A is really good if you just want to ask something anonymously. So utilize those. And without further ado, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. Matt, why don't you go, then Diana, and then Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Maggie, for putting this on. I'm Matt Nielson. I'm the Chief Experience Officer for Vestigo. We're a small startup based out of Atlanta. I'm actually in Oxford, Mississippi, where I live but work remotely. And even though my title is Chief Experience Officer, I spend about 50% of my time in the sales realm since we have a pretty small team. And classic startup, you get to do a little bit of everything. And my background is 12 years of B2B sales. So excited to contribute.
Hi, everyone. And Maggie, thank you again for putting this on because this is definitely something that everyone needs right now. And so I'm Diana Calle. I am a team lead at Jopwell, which is a New York City-based startup. For those of you that don't know who Jopwell is, we are a career advancement platform for Black, Latinx, and Native Americans. And so my role is really focused on growing revenue for the business through partnering with startups, nonprofits, enterprise organizations, and our ultimate goal is to help diversify their workforce. And so I've been in B2B sales for over 5 years at this point. I was in operations management before that, so really I've transitioned my role and excited to be here.
Hey everybody, my name is Chris O'Connor. As I said on one of the other sessions, my number one job is husband to Maggie. But my second job, I'm the head of sales development at a company called Ambition. And we are a sales coaching and gamification platform. We primarily sell to other sales orgs, helping to keep their employees or sellers engaged, motivated, and competitive. And so, yeah, so it's been an interesting time. Obviously, I'm excited about this conversation and talk a little bit more about how, we can be effective sellers in this climate.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. To kick things off, because this is just such a weird time and every single person is in the same boat. Obviously, people are affected in different ways, but we're all being affected somehow by coronavirus. So I want to kick this conversation off talking about empathy and specifically how we are teaching our teams to be more empathetic or how we're teaching ourselves how to be more empathetic, especially when selling. So I would love to kick things off first with that. It's been honestly just kind of a theme across all of the sessions, really. So let's chat first with that.
I'm happy to kick that off just because I think that's something that not only have I been thinking about recently, but throughout my sales careers, for me, being empathetic is something that I find to be like my strong suit when selling, right? You need to understand what are your buyers' challenges, where are they at right now, what are their budget restrictions, and especially during COVID, it's not just about, what are their budget restrictions, it's really about what's happening in their personal life, right? Like right now, I've been personally affected by COVID-19, lost someone very close to me, and I know plenty of people that have been affected by it. And so you always have to keep in mind that aside from there being an economic crisis, there are people that are going through everyday suffering, and you need to be empathetic about that. You need to recognize that we are all human beings. Like, I think salespeople have a tendency of having just like a bad rep when they're too pushy, right? When they're always looking to just get that next deal, as opposed to taking a step back and just understanding where the business is right now, where your buyer is right now, and just making a conscious decision to not necessarily just always push the deal, but nurture that relationship, right? And be understanding of, you know what, maybe they're not in the right mindset to make a buy right now, but if you continue to nurture that relationship, maybe next month they will be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I would add on to that too, kind of practically what I've been doing with my team. So I manage a team of sellers and have been really making sure that, like, you know, because I think when they typically enter a cold call or are sending an email, like the goal is, right, to get something from someone, right? To get them to agree to a meeting, try to get them interested in your product. And so I've been trying to coach on come to the lens of, you know, your goal is relationship building, right? Let it not be about selling something. Let it be about building the relationship, because we have no idea what's going on in their world. They could be laying people off. They could be personally affected by COVID. So focus on building the relationship so that, you know, you're the first vendor they reach back out to once things settle down a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, do you think this changes the playbook moving forward? Like how will you hold on to the things that you're learning now from kind of that empathy standpoint, and how you sell or how you teach your teams to sell moving forward once this is all over, hopefully sooner than later?
Yeah, I'm glad to kick that off. I mean, I think there's 100%, and I'm a fan of selling that comes from asking questions and listening. And I think right now it's the time to learn how to ask questions and listen. I mean, practically speaking, like what Chris was saying, I think it's a good opportunity to do some role playing with your team and asking them questions and setting the example. If you're not good at asking your team questions and investing in your team, it's going to be hard to convince them that they need to do that for potential clients. So that's one of the things that we've been doing at Vestigo, is just asking each other questions, probably more so than we typically would. And we work remotely. So we're used to inquiring on what's going on with people's lives, but really, I think we've come together as a team more in this time because we've been seeking to understand each other and where each other, you know, where we are. And I absolutely think that will carry on past this. So it's a great time for growth. It's a great time to invest in your team, and then watch them emulate that practice as they invest in potential clients, already existing clients, and try to further the relationship. I mean, when I hear, you know, build the relationship, I really think a lot of it is asking questions and listening. That's kind of relationship building in my perspective.
Yeah.
So.
There's a good question here. I'd like to go ahead and just read it out loud. Definitely think relationship building is always important in sales, but ultimately our buyers know we're building that relationship to sell to them better. How do you all handle that nuance, stay authentic, and still try to drive outcomes for your organization?
That's a good question. I'm happy to jump in here. I think for, you know, what I and my team and what we, you know, talk about what we need to do is making sure that we are staying top of mind. Yes, like everyone knows, if you have a lead, like your ultimate goal is to sell them. You understand that and they understand that. But it's about the approach that you're taking. So what we do a lot, what we're doing a lot, and we've done so over the last few months, is really think about what kind of value can we bring that's not from a selling perspective. Right. So I share articles around, you know, how to build culture awareness during COVID-19. We invite them to different webinars that we're putting on for partners. So it's not always like, hey, let's do this because I want you to pay us. It's like, here's what we can help you with. Here's something that you can take on. It's free. You can explore these options. It'll work for you in the long term without you necessarily coming on board. And that just kind of shows you that you're still authentic because you're caring about where the customer comes from, what their challenges are, and not necessarily always coming to the, hey, let's work together right now.
Love it.
Yeah, that idea of deposits versus withdrawals is so popular right now on LinkedIn. And I think, you know, prior to COVID, that was just like a nice thing that people were doing. And now it's a requirement. I mean, you have to be showing value before you try to take something from someone.
I have another question to read out loud. This is a good one too. How is leadership, director of sales, CROs, going about lessening your goals? Have goals and projections shifted, allowing a lowering of expectations?
Yeah, we just recently went through this at my company where we adjusted quotas for each team member. I think what was really important in that process is to, especially for my team, let them know that what we're adjusting are the outcome objectives, like, revenue or things like that. We're not adjusting the activity measurements, right? So it's really important that we're still, making the same amount of calls, phone, all that kind of stuff, so that we are at least doing everything we can to minimize the impact to pipeline. So we've definitely adjusted quotas, and it was with support of the board and all of that, but are still trying to keep activity high, even though sellers know that their chances of converting are going to be a little bit lower in this time.
I think that's a great response. I think a lot of it too depends on what industry you're in and what you're providing. I mean, there's certainly some companies that are going to be coming out a lot more flush than others through this. And so I think it's identifying what it is that you provide of value, and can you tailor it to meet the current demand. And Chris pointed this out in some of our discussion beforehand. Pursuing those industries that have a need for your product that are also doing well during this time is a really smart move. So from a revenue perspective, I agree. In most cases, for most companies, it's realistic to lower the revenue perspective we have. But I think it's also valuable to ask your team what they expect and to ask them to do some research. I mean, more research than I think we've traditionally done, of figuring out who's in a position to spend money right now and who's probably not, and focusing your time on where you're going to have your highest batting average.
That's a great segue to this next question that someone had. There's a lot of companies out there doing well in this market. How are you prospecting those businesses? So more, if you guys could provide maybe some more kind of tangible, specific examples, that'd be awesome, I think.
I'm happy to speak to that, because I like being that job board itself is in the recruiting space, right? We've definitely seen a hit on, how many companies are actually coming on board, right? A lot of companies right now are on a hiring freeze. They're not hiring at all. They're on a budget freeze. And so what we have done is really be strategic about who is it that we're going to target from an outreach perspective, right? So for me, a lot of my focus was on the SMB market. So I focus on companies who I know have received funding over the last, let's say, 4 months, right? So if you've received funding from December to now, I'm going to assume that you're in a better position to bring on business, right? Based on the fact that you might have a bit more money than other organizations. So great tools for that are like Crunchbase is one of the main tools that I use to pull that type of information. Aside from that, it's really focusing, again, Matt touched on this, the types of industries that are, recession proof from COVID-19, right? So companies like telecommunications, right? Like Zoom and anything that of course allows us to do this, right? There are companies who, at least from an ed learning perspective, right? And ed tech, who are providing courses online and things of that sort. So really being strategic and doing your research about what are the companies that are thriving right now, right? And then you can kind of create a pipeline later on once everything starts to simmer down a little bit, and see, who kind of opens up those pipelines again.
And how does the messaging change? I mean, it's probably a little bit different, right? So let's dive into a little bit of that, the nuts and bolts of the actual messaging.
Yeah. At least for us, we actually, as a team, we went back and forth with this for a little bit, trying to say like, okay, do we acknowledge that all of this is happening on like a cold outreach perspective, or do we just kind of take it business as usual? And so obviously we all came to the decision that we need to acknowledge this, right? We need to acknowledge that organizations are facing these challenges right now. But again, I think for us, it really comes down to, again, the research, right? If I'm making it a point to reach out to a company, I'm looking at their career site. I'm looking to see any news that have recently happened. I'm doing my research on the person that I'm speaking to. And I'm really personalizing my outreach specific to where they're at right now, while acknowledging that we have a crisis going on. So I think it's just about, again, like really being strategic and doing research is like the main thing when you're looking to do outreach to anyone at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's some really valuable insight. We've taken the approach, in the past, it's been much more of a blanket approach. And now I encouraged the team to go a little bit deeper. So we put together a form that we used way back when called a deep dive spreadsheet. And it's going through and it's looking at who are the top 5 people within an organization that we want to contact and what's something unique about them, and really personalizing the message more than we typically would. I think there's a lot of schools of thought probably out there right now. My opinion is that there's a great value in trying a number of different things and not getting locked into just one approach. So we've been testing really since all of COVID hit. It's kind of like this nonstop test because everything is changing, and it changes daily, weekly, with who's getting funding, with who's winning, with who's not, with who's struggling. But we identified, here's 5 companies, and instead of spending 20 minutes on each of them doing a little bit of research, what if we spent 45 minutes on each of them to do research, come up with what you can, and figure out some specific people that you want to reach out to and develop that message in a little bit more of a customized fashion, in a more personal fashion than what you maybe would have. I think one of the upsides of this, and it goes back to the first question, is that people are realizing that they have an opportunity to grow in empathy. They have an opportunity to understand where somebody is and that they're a human. But that's just how we've approached it, is a little bit more of a human perspective and a little bit deeper dive into the people that we're pursuing than what we would have done 4 months ago.
Yeah, I think one thing you said, Matt, really resonated with me, and that is you always have to be in testing mode. Because I think one school of thought, you'd be, oh, this is how we need to address things right now, and then after doing some testing, you're like, well, we need to change course. Being in sales, like I've always preached personalization and quality over quantity when it comes to outreach. But frankly, I have a rep right now who is top of the team, who's changed his approach a little bit to be more quality or more quantity over quantity, just because he says, it's such a mixed bag out there that he wants to get on the phone with as many people as possible, understand where they're at. And so he spent a little bit less time tailoring messaging and more time just like hitting the phones, and it's been working for him. So that's what I encourage my reps to do, is always be A/B testing, whatever you're doing, so that you're not, putting all your eggs in one basket.
I have another question for you guys. It's from Paul. I know the answer will depend on what you are selling and your targets, but when you're keeping activity up as normal as possible, what are some examples you are using to reach out? You mentioned testing. What are some surprise wins when reaching out? Anyone have any examples?
Yeah. One, I think subject lines, right? I think what we've tested a few things is like, what's the best approach for a subject line? What gets the most open rates? And based on our data, when we include the person's name, like honestly, something as simple as like, hi, Maggie, quick question, that'll get like a 50% plus open rate, as opposed to just having something that is dealing with, like if I have a subject line that says like diversity and inclusion, it might get a lower open rate. So again, just connecting with the person directly. And then for us, at least for my team and myself, the way that we're approaching it, it's not so much as like, hey, I have this great product, right? Like, let's talk about expanding your pipelines during COVID-19. It's more so like, hey, this is the company that I work for. Are you open to connecting and talking about what we're doing, how we've shifted to make sure that we are focusing on DE&I during this time, and how other companies that we're working with have shifted. So it's not so much about like, let me tell you about my product. It's like, just talk strategy. Let me understand what you're doing and see how I can help.
Awesome. All
I
right.
was going to share a win that we've had. It's been, historically we've sent a lot of emails, and if we're connecting with somebody and we know them, we're using LinkedIn to send them a message oftentimes. I personally feel like, and this is a personal opinion, that email is a lot of folks' least preferred way to just connect. And it can get really long, and it can get arduous to have to go through your inbox. I mean, Maggie, I've seen some of your stories where you post like, I got my email inbox down to 0, and it's just like, it's kind of this accomplishment. We've been using a cell phone text to folks that we have their cell phone number. And a lot of these are existing clients. We had several clients that were on the cusp of pulling the trigger. In fact, one big client that was executing the contract and it got halted, which was a giant bummer. But we've reached out to them and a number of people with a cell phone text message, and we've gotten a much higher response rate, and they've been willing to set up a time to talk so that you can have a real thoughtful conversation. And that's been yielding better for us than I think in the past. We got a little bit better email response rate. So if you have that, I encourage people to just drop a short text, especially if it's an existing client. That's led to some connections and some discussion about how we can help. So,
one more question. How are you adjusting your product offerings, if at all, during this time? I've heard of companies giving discounts, etc., which is a good question, because I also wanted to talk a little bit about kind of that barrier of entry for potential clients. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. This is just a huge exercise my company just went through with two things, is to think about how are we packaging our products? How can we make it a little bit more accessible to the market? And then also, how do we provide proofs of concept or trials so that folks can have a little bit less of a investment up front, but still get to see the value of our product. And so that's gone really well, especially with the folks that we already had in funnel. So they already kind of saw the value of what we offer, but are just kind of like, there's no way that we're going to invest in something, in Q2. Let's talk to you in Q4. And we say, hey, well, why don't you go into a proof of concept with us? We'll lower that barrier of entry. You get to test the product out for 2 months. And then we'll make a decision on a longer term contract. And so far, that's been a really good tactic for us, getting people in that POC. So that's been a good adjustment that we've made recently.
Yeah, I would piggyback off what Chris said. For us, we did a big exercise, like, okay, like, what is the main barrier of entry right now? Especially because our product, what JobWall does and what we sell, it's not like your traditional SaaS product. Like, this is a human capital product as well. And so for us, it was one, from a budget perspective, let's kind of reduce our costs a little bit, right? To make sure that that's not a barrier of entry for companies who we know are still committed to building D&I within the organization. But then we needed to get creative, and it's like, okay, so we're going to reduce it a little bit, but what else? If companies are not hiring right now, which is what we're coming across, what kind of value can we provide to still make sure that they're finding interest in working with us? And so what we've done is actually transition to a lot of virtual events. So we're having, companies are able to sponsor events. They can have virtual career fairs, panels, like Ask Me Anythings, where essentially they're getting to engage directly with our community at scale, right? Which was much harder to do when you're doing in-person events. So we've really built out, I would say, a new suite of services where we're helping companies with, yes, recruiting and building brand awareness, but also internal training. So we're offering companies the ability to have us host webinars for their own organization to discuss DE&I. Right. And that helps companies show their employees that they are serious about building a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce, and that they're putting their foot forward, especially during the crisis, because as we all know, underrepresented and marginalized communities are the ones that get the most affected by something like this. And so kind of building on new, suite of services. So if you catch a JAPL webinar around there, please join, they're free.
Nice plug.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. We've talked a lot about kind of just some tangible things, some actionable things, and a lot of it's been fairly positive. We're talking about empathy. What do we do? What are you guys doing with your teams and with yourselves when it's just rejection after rejection after rejection? How are you maintaining any sort of positive outlook without really knowing when this is all going to end?
The one practical thing that I've done is gone outside and picked up a couple of sticks in the yard and put them in a pile. And I know that sounds absurd, but sometimes you just need to do something that you can see the results of and have it be a positive thing. Our company took a giant hit. All of the experiences we provided, all the programs were in person. We've shifted and we have some virtual offerings, but we've gotten a lot of no's, and a lot of what we were doing, we can't even offer as a product right now for immediate implementation. We can offer it for a later implementation, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So I like to do something that is certain, go outside and plant a flower or pick up a stick or take your dog on a 5-minute walk. I'm doing more of that now than I ever have. And it's just take it easy on yourself and do something that's mindless that produces a result.
That's awesome.
That might be overly simplistic.
No, that's great.
No.
Yeah. I would say we're focusing on also just like the metrics that we know our team is in control over. Like for instance, this week I ran a quick competition. I could definitely tell that morale on my team was down. And so I spun up a competition that was, hey, if everybody hits their daily activity goals Monday through Thursday, on Friday, I'm going to give you the afternoon off. Like just take the afternoon off. Don't do anything. And that went over really well. I saw a quick spike in, engagement. And so, so we're definitely having to get creative in this time to challenge the reps, keep them engaged, things like that.
Yeah, I would say for us, a lot of it has been celebrating the small wins, right? So even if like sales, listen, you're in sales, you're going to get rejected 90% of the time, right? Like that's part of it being in sales. But we do celebrate the small wins, whether it's like even a reply to an email, even if they're saying not right now, but let's connect in Q3, like that's a win, right? That's a lead that you can still nurture. And so doing that, a lot of happy hours, that's been a thing, and just kind of taking the afternoon, like we'll end early, we'll end at like 4:30, and just taking the afternoon to just talk about not work related stuff and not COVID related stuff, but just like, what are we doing to stay sane?
Yeah. I think I'm really hopeful that once all of this is over and said and done, that leaders are taking all of these lessons into their future playbooks, and just the way that they manage and the way they coach and lead is just different. Obviously, this is a crappy time, but I am hopeful that this changes a lot of behavior inside, walls that are maybe typically really stale or lack empathy. A question from Michael: are any of your teams currently planning for the eventual emergence from COVID and or trying to visualize sales tactics as states begin to open their doors once again?
I think our team is more in like the early stages. Right now, what we're using this time for is really like data gathering and like really trying to get an understanding. I would say for more like enterprise sized companies, what we've seen is a pattern of like business as usual, right? Like those are the types of companies that are already recession proof. So, but we're thinking through and really starting to collect data. I mean, we send weekly updates, like what are the sentiments that we're hearing to really plan for Q3, Q4, especially for smaller organizations, like what is that trend going to be even when the states open up, right? Even when things are starting to open And so we don't have a plan just yet, but we're working on one. As the more data that we get, the easier it'll be to come up with an actual plan.
For sure.
For us, it's been a lot of uncertainty about when things will quote unquote go back to normal, or what that is going to look like. One of the things that we've had the opportunity to do is we were in the midst of some new product development as this came about. And we've been able to get more feedback and advice from potential clients to further develop that product. And so we want to launch that as we start to see, hey, it makes sense to launch it. We're too early to launch it. And so instead of launching like we were hoping, we've kind of gone into more of a deeper customer discovery. And that's been a nice thing to do in the meantime. That's building relationships when you ask somebody for advice. You don't ask them for the sale, but you ask them for input on your process. I think there's some value there to be doing right now. We're certainly in the early stages because we just still don't know when are we going to be able to do things in person. And the virtual options that we have, we like them, but we haven't gotten the traction that we had hoped for. So it's like, what can you do in the meantime to work on some of those projects that are super important, but we're not burning your butt in that, in the flurry that was pre-COVID.
Yeah, we've also spent a lot of time focusing on product in this time and just trying to or think about, Q3, Q4, like if we go back to some sense of normal, how have things changed and how we sell in that environment. And, it's guesswork at this point, but we just released an integration actually with Zoom, which hopefully is going to help, I imagine a lot of companies are going to see the value in this remote work and continue doing that on through the fall. So we'll see, but yeah, I think it's in the meantime, we've been focusing on product to try to guess as to what back half of the year might look like.
Here's maybe a more personal question for each of you. Will you continue to carry on some of these new habits or contests or picking up sticks going forward?
Yeah, I don't think that once things there's going to be a new normal, right? Like things are not going to go back to the way that they were pre-COVID, just in general. So I think, you have to take like things that are working right now, like the happy hours that we have with our team. Those are things that we weren't doing as much before, but now we find that it just brings us closer together. It helps us just be closer as a team, helps build culture around our team and the organization. So those are things that, we can't lose as salespeople, right? Like continue to build partner relationships, not just with our partners, but also with our colleagues, because regardless, we're still spending most of our day with them anyways. And so I think there are a lot of things that are gonna, are kind of gonna go back to normal, but there's gonna be new habits, right, that come out of this that are gonna be great for organizations and for teams.
Yeah, I just want to interject real quick. Like I'm so hopeful, and I'm eager to see habits change and behaviors change. But I also wonder, and this isn't really a question, maybe you guys can comment here, but I wonder, how you go on an incredible vacation and you're just like, wow, that was the best vacation. And it taught me that and reminded me that I love exploring other cultures and I love trying new foods and trying new recipes. And you're on this mountaintop high. I mean, the same is true for when I used to go to church camp when I was in elementary school, right? You go to church camp and you're like, yeah, cool. And you have all these amazing keynote speakers or whatever. And you come back and you're like, cool, I'm doing it. And it lasts for like a week or whatever, So I'm just like, I wonder if that's going to be the case. Obviously we don't know. I hope not, but I wonder about that. Does anyone else think about that?
Yeah, I think that's go ahead, Chris.
No, I would just say, yeah, like I think I've learned more in the last 6 weeks than I probably have in any other point in my career. Just about like, how to manage a team through this, how to quickly adjust and keep your mind open to things. So I would hope that that's not just a revival experience. And, it's something that while I never would want this to happen again, I see so many silver linings and things that I've learned through this period. And so I guess it depends on the individual, but I think I'd be able to, still apply and carry some of these learnings afterwards. We'll see.
I'll hold you accountable.
Yeah.
I was inspired by a mentor in a webinar a couple of days ago, who's an Olympic gold medalist in whitewater canoe slalom, where he would actually paddle with another person in the boat. And he talked a lot about practicing in the calm water. And I know for right now, a lot of people are feeling like this is maybe tumultuous water, but you're probably not traveling nearly as much. You're probably not moving around as much. And if you can be intentional in carving that time, this was the challenge for me that I'm going to have to implement. If you can practice in this calm water, things are going to ramp back up. The world is not forever going to be in this current state. Change is inevitable. But if you can practice in the calm water, when you get back into the white water, it allows you to be able to adjust and move and flow with the river with good habits. If you get dunked right into the white water, it's really easy to develop bad habits, to be reactionary, to be upset when your rep does X, Y, Z, to be frustrated. If you can practice in the calm water, I think it really will translate as we ramp back up, as things continue to change. So find that calm water and practice what you want to be intentional with moving forward. So not original content, but really liked it and thought it was worth repeating.
That's an awesome illustration. With that said, I know that we're getting a little bit closer to our time. So what I'm going to do is throw up the LinkedIn URLs of each of our panelists so that you guys can connect with them. And if you've been on any other session in the past, then it's not, you should probably include some sort of message when you want to connect with them, just so that there's context. But I'm going to do that. And while I do that, if you guys could maybe share kind of the biggest things that are top of mind for you right now in relation to this topic.
Prospecting. No, but honestly, it's just making sure that my team feels like they're still being set up for success, even though there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So just being, having, I think to your point, using the calm water, right? Having more trainings, really helping them and maybe perfect their pitch, change things a little bit. But also have them understand, like, you can still pipeline, there's still business out there. We just need to be strategic about it, and just making sure that I am being supportive of them throughout this process. That's my main thing, is just making sure, I would say, is like they're okay and they're feeling okay, even with all the uncertainty that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have a similar response, and my team is probably sick and tired of me saying this, and frankly, I'm tired of saying it to it. But I've been saying the last 6 weeks so many times is control what you can control, and it's got to be so true right now, because there's so many things that are outside of our control, and we can't be worried about, is someone going to buy, or are they not? Like, we can focus on the impact and the relationship that we can build with them, and just hope that we can steer them towards a buying cycle with us. But otherwise, you, as a seller, you're just going to be so demoralized in this environment. So yeah, control what you can control.
On that note, I think there's a huge value, and I learned this the hard way. The first couple of weeks after COVID really became a reality, I took in way too much information. I read way too much information. I thought way too much. I spent way too much of my energy exploring all the inevitables. And as Chris has said, you can only control what you can control. And you can expend a lot of energy and time trying to control things that you can't. And so, I think it comes back to a practice of the fundamentals. And that's what I'm having to continually remind myself. I mean, there's days that I don't look at the news. I don't look at LinkedIn stories. I don't look at the market report. I don't look at what industries are doing well and which ones are failing. Like, some days it's just practicing the fundamentals, and there is such thing as taking in too much. and trying to do something about that. You can't. And, you know, in conversations with my wife, at the end of me ranting for 15 minutes about X, Y, or Z that's working or not working, I come to this realization that contribute what you can to the world and contribute to your team, contribute to people, and that will eventually, there's a return on that investment.
For sure. There's a comment that I'd like to share with everybody. She said, I'd love to answer this too, from what I've learned today from this discussion. What's top of mind for me is making sure my prospects feel good about engaging with me and, if they can, buying from a human being who genuinely cares about improving their business. I love that. Does anyone else out there have any other questions before we wrap up? This is the time, or comments, this is the time. If there are some that are trickling in, I'll take this time to thank Matt, Diana, and Chris for spending this time with all of us. I am so grateful that you guys just hopped on this idea so quickly and that you're spending your 45 minutes volunteering your time this way. So thank you guys so much. And thank you all for engaging with us and asking us questions. It's not as fun when you just feel like you're talking to yourself. So
yeah.
Thank you all. It looks like there aren't any other questions, which I love ending things early. So that's great. A reminder, this is being recorded. I'll send this email out to you guys at some point today. Complete the survey and then let me know if you want the recording or recordings of other sessions. So thanks everybody and have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
All right, see you guys.
It's a pleasure having this discussion with you all.
Loved it. All right, bye everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.